The United States can strike targets almost anywhere inside Iran. Its aircraft can cross thousands of kilometers, its satellites can track movements from space, and its naval forces can operate across the Persian Gulf. Iran cannot match that power directly. Its air force is smaller. Its economy has been weakened by years of sanctions. Many of its military facilities have already come under attack. And yet, the war continues. Missiles still rise into the night. Drones still approach American bases. Commercial vessels still hesitate before entering one of the world's most important waterways. And every new attack creates another reason for retaliation. So why has the world's most powerful military been unable to create a peace that lasts? The answer is not simply hidden inside a nuclear facility, a missile base, or a government office. It lies in what both sides believe could happen after they stop fighting. Because for Iran and the United States, compromise may feel almost as dangerous as war. Before we continue, subscribe if you believe these stories deserve more than headlines. Behind every military decision are families who never entered the negotiation room, but may still pay the highest price for what happens there. Because stopping the missiles is only the beginning. The harder question is what each side must surrender to make them stop permanently. Direct hostilities between the United States and Iran began in February 2026, during a wider American and Israeli military campaign. Iran responded with missiles and drones aimed at Israel, American personnel, and locations across the Gulf associated with U.S. military operations. For a brief moment, it appeared that diplomacy might interrupt the cycle. In June, an interim understanding was reached. The fighting slowed, negotiations were expected to continue, and the Strait of Hormuz was supposed to reopen to normal commercial traffic. But the arrangement did not resolve the most difficult questions. It did not settle Iran's nuclear future. It did not end the sanctions dispute. It did not clearly define who could inspect or control shipping through the strait. And it did not create enough trust to prevent every new incident from becoming another accusation. Soon, both sides were claiming that the other had violated the agreement. Strikes resumed. American casualties and financial costs increased. Iranian military sites, ports, and infrastructure suffered further damage. Civilians across the region faced alerts, power disruptions, and growing uncertainty. The ceasefire had not created peace, it had only delayed the next confrontation, and its collapse revealed something important. Iran and the United States were not fighting over one issue. At the center of the confrontation is Iran's nuclear program, but surrounding it are several other conflicts. There is the struggle over the Strait of Hormuz, the dispute over American military bases across the Middle East, the question of Israel's security, Iran's missile and drone programs, its relationships with armed organizations across the region, years of sanctions and economic isolation, and a deeper struggle over whether the Iranian political system can survive without the military leverage it has spent decades building. Washington wants to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. It also wants commercial shipping protected, American forces secure, and regional allies defended. Tehran wants sanctions relief, recognition of its nuclear rights, and protection from future American or Israeli attacks. It also wants to preserve enough military power to ensure that no foreign government can easily threaten its survival. These objectives are connected. Iran may accept nuclear limits only if sanctions are removed. The United States may remove sanctions only after those limits are verified. Iran fears that giving up leverage first will leave it exposed. Washington fears that easing pressure first will allow Iran to rebuild. A solution to one problem can therefore make another problem worse. And that is where America's greatest advantage becomes less decisive than it first appears. In a conventional war, the military balance heavily favors the United States. American aircraft can destroy radar systems, command centers, missile factories, and naval facilities. Its surveillance systems can track military movements across enormous distances. Its warships and submarines can launch precision weapons without approaching Iran's coastline. But destroying military infrastructure is not the same as forcing political surrender. Buildings can be rebuilt, missile production can be dispersed, launchers can be moved, equipment can be hidden underground, and technical knowledge cannot be destroyed by an airstrike. The United States may be able to reduce Iran's ability to fight, but reducing that ability does not guarantee that Iran's leadership will accept American terms. A government can lose aircraft, ships, factories, and bases while still refusing to surrender what it considers essential to national survival. This creates the central military paradox. America can win repeated battles without achieving the political outcome it wants. Iran does not need to defeat the United States directly. It only needs to survive long enough and retain enough retaliatory power to make a complete American victory too expensive. And Iran has spent decades developing a strategy designed for exactly that purpose. Iran cannot compete with the United States weapon for weapon. Instead, it relies on asymmetric warfare. Ballistic missiles can threaten distant bases. One-way attack drones can approach radar systems at low altitude. Mobile launchers can be moved before they are detected. Fast boats and coastal missiles can pressure naval forces. Sea mines can make commercial shipping nervous even before a vessel is attacked. Cyber operations can disrupt networks without producing a visible battlefield. And armed organizations aligned with Iran can create pressure across several countries at once. These relationships are not all identical. Some groups receive funding, weapons, or training from Iran while maintaining their own leadership and local objectives. That makes responsibility difficult to establish. An attack may occur while diplomats are negotiating. Iran may deny giving the order. Its opponents may still hold Tehran responsible. The United States must protect military bases, airfields, ships, embassies, ports, allies, and thousands of personnel spread across the region. Iran does not need to destroy all of them. It only needs occasional successful attacks to increase casualties, fear, and political pressure. Even defense can become expensive. A relatively cheap drone may force the use of aircraft, advanced radar, and costly interceptor missiles. The attacker chooses when to act. The defender must remain prepared every day. But Iran's strongest form of leverage may not be a missile or a drone. It may be the narrow stretch of water beside its southern coastline. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow enough to appear almost insignificant on a world map. But through this passage moves roughly 1/5 of the petroleum consumed globally. Oil and gas exports from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar depend heavily on this route. Much of that energy travels toward China, India, Japan, and South Korea. This means a confrontation involving Iran can affect factories, transport systems, and household prices thousands of kilometers away. Alternative pipelines exist, but they cannot fully replace the enormous amount of energy normally moving through the strait. If shipping slows, insurance costs rise, tankers wait outside the Gulf, refineries become concerned about future supply, energy prices react before shortages even begin. For Iran, this geography creates strategic leverage. Tehran may not be able to defeat the American Navy, but it can make companies question whether entering the Gulf is safe. It can force other governments to pay attention. It can transform pressure on Iran into pressure on the global economy. The United States, however, views free passage through Hormuz as non-negotiable. Allowing one country to regulate shipping through force, impose political conditions, or threaten commercial vessels could create a dangerous international precedent. Iran sees control as a source of protection. Washington sees that same control as coercion, and neither side is willing to surrender its position easily. But even if every tanker returned tomorrow, the most dangerous disagreement would still remain: the nuclear question. Iran insists that its nuclear program is intended for peaceful purposes. It argues that it has the right to civilian nuclear energy and domestic uranium enrichment. But uranium enrichment exists on a scale. At lower levels, enriched uranium can support civilian energy and research. At much higher levels, the same technology can move a country closer to the material required for a nuclear weapon. Enrichment alone does not prove that Iran has built a bomb, but advanced centrifuges, growing stockpiles, and limited access for inspectors can reduce the time needed to approach that capability. This is what concerns the United States and Israel. They fear that Iran could remain just below the nuclear threshold, preserving the knowledge and infrastructure needed to move closer whenever it chooses. Iran sees the issue differently. It believes that surrendering enrichment would mean giving up a legal right and one of its strongest bargaining tools. And military attacks create another problem. Bombing may damage centrifuges, tunnels, and electrical systems, but it cannot erase scientific knowledge. It may also encourage Iran to build deeper facilities, disperse equipment, and restrict international access even further. The more vulnerable Iran feels, the more valuable a powerful deterrent may appear. The same logic also traps negotiations. Iran wants economic relief and security guarantees before surrendering its nuclear leverage. The United States wants verified nuclear concessions before providing those benefits. Neither side wants to move first, and even a signed agreement may not solve that problem, because both governments remember what happened the last time they tried. Iran and the United States do not begin their history at the same moment. For many Iranians, the story begins in 1953. Iran's elected prime minister was removed after challenging foreign interests and nationalizing the country's oil industry. American involvement in the operation later became publicly documented. The Shah returned with strong Western support. His government modernized parts of Iran, but it also became associated with political repression and foreign influence. Then came the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Shah was overthrown. The American embassy was seized. More than 50 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. For the United States, the hostage crisis became one of the defining memories of the relationship. For Iran, the earlier coup remained evidence that Washington might interfere whenever Iranian politics threatened American interests. The two countries therefore built completely different histories of betrayal. Iran remembers the coup, support for the Shah, sanctions, and military pressure. The United States remembers the hostages, attacks on American personnel, threats against allies, and concerns over secret nuclear activity. The nuclear agreement signed decades later was supposed to interrupt that history. Iran accepted restrictions and monitoring in exchange for sanctions relief. But the agreement later collapsed. Tehran concluded that American promises could disappear after an election. Critics in Washington and Israel concluded that temporary restrictions only delayed the danger. The same agreement produced opposite lessons. Iran believed it should never surrender leverage without permanent guarantees. Its opponents believed pressure should never be removed without permanent restrictions. But even perfect trust between Washington and Tehran would not be enough, because they are not the only actors shaping this war. Israel sees Iran's nuclear program, missile forces, and regional alliances as parts of the same threat. An agreement that appears acceptable in Washington may still be viewed in Israel as dangerously weak. Gulf countries face a different dilemma. Several depend on American security partnerships. Some host American military forces, but they are also located close to Iran and vulnerable to missile or drone attacks. Their economies depend on ports, energy facilities, and stable shipping. Their cities rely on power grids and desalination systems that cannot easily be replaced if damaged. They want protection from Iran, but they do not want their territory to become the battlefield on which Washington and Tehran settle their rivalry. Armed groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the Palestinian territories add another layer. Their relationships with Iran vary. That means peace can be broken by an event that neither negotiating delegation fully controls: a maritime incident, a missile launch, an attack on Israel, a strike on an American base, a disputed nuclear discovery. One event can pull every actor back into the conflict, and once retaliation begins, the cycle becomes difficult to interrupt. The pattern is often the same. One side launches an attack and describes it as deterrence. The other calls it aggression and promises retaliation. That retaliation is then described as necessary to restore credibility. The first side responds again, arguing that failure to act would invite more attacks. Targets expand, casualties rise, and negotiation begins to look like weakness. Every country also chooses a different beginning for the story. Washington may begin with an Iranian missile attack. Tehran may begin with an earlier American or Israeli strike. Israel may begin with Iran's nuclear and missile development. Iran may begin with sanctions or the collapse of previous agreements. Almost every attack can therefore be presented as retaliation. Ceasefires struggle because the sides also disagree on what compliance means. Does stopping direct attacks include armed groups? Are maritime inspections allowed? Which sanctions must be removed? Can military forces remain on alert? Who investigates a disputed incident? And how long should either side wait before responding? Then comes the sequencing problem. Iran wants sanctions relief before giving up leverage. Washington wants concessions before providing relief. Iran wants guarantees before accepting vulnerability. The United States wants proof before offering guarantees. As the deaths and financial costs increase, compromise becomes even harder. Leaders must show that the sacrifices achieved something. Stopping without a visible gain can be presented as defeat. For decades, this conflict has been counted in missiles, sanctions, military budgets, and diplomatic deadlines. But for the people who live with it, the meaning is far simpler. It is another night spent listening for sirens. Another deployment that keeps a family waiting. Another tanker captain crossing one of the world's most dangerous waterways. Another business watching fuel prices rise. Another generation growing up with the quiet belief that peace is always temporary. The tragedy is that no one truly misunderstands the cost. Iran knows what another war could destroy. The United States knows that military power alone cannot create lasting peace. Israel knows the danger of living under a growing missile threat. The Gulf states know how quickly prosperity can turn into vulnerability. Everyone understands what war would look like. The harder question is whether anyone believes peace is worth the risk. Because this conflict has never been driven by hatred alone. It has been driven by fear. Fear of deception. Fear of weakness. Fear that one concession could invite another crisis. And once fear becomes the foundation of policy, even the strongest nations can remain trapped in the same cycle. that may be the real reason this conflict is so difficult to end. Not because diplomacy is impossible, not because the costs are unknown, but because trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than cities, economies, or alliances. Perhaps one day, there will be another agreement. Perhaps there will be another crisis instead. History has shown that both remain possible. And until one side becomes convinced that cooperation is safer than confrontation, the world may continue living between those two outcomes. The deeper question is whether two rivals shaped by decades of suspicion can still learn how to prepare for peace instead of the next war. What do you think? Can this conflict still be resolved through diplomacy, or has distrust gone too far for compromise to matter? Subscribe for more insights that go beyond the headlines and uncover the deeper forces shaping world events.